Hey, good afternoon, Living Word. We're at 1 Peter, and specifically chapter 3, verses 1 through 7, on the third part of a series on relationships, in this case dealing with the relationship of marriage. Special thanks to my wife, Glorianne, for partnering with me in the presentation. Her testimony and her thoughtfulness was complimented on many. By many, and I echo that. She was very prayerful, and in her preparation, it came through, and just delighted to hear her voice because I love her so much, and I'm so appreciative of her relationship with me and how God has ordained marriage and finds a suitable helper. It's wonderful. And I learned so much from studying this passage and considered more how I can honor her. And so certainly want to, just by way of encouragement, encourage all who are listening, whether you're currently married or maybe formerly married or considering marriage. There may be something in this short video for you to consider in your own relationship with the Lord and with others, either in your own relationship of marriage or praying for and supporting and guiding people into healthy marriage. So with that said, there's something that that First Peter addressed prior, which I felt was an important hinge that this verse kind of turns on, and that's First Peter chapter 2, verse 21, which is really a call to imitate Christ. And the text says this: "For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you might follow in his steps." And we looked at Peter and thought about his trajectory of learning to follow Jesus upon his first call, and how that was the last call Jesus gave him on the seashore. And that is really the simplest way to put it. Being a Christian is following Jesus. And Peter uses two words here: to see Jesus as an example and to follow in his footsteps. You probably have seen some other examples of marriage, people that you know who've had a great marriage, and it was worth following their example. So take a moment, kind of as part one, and share some of that. Maybe you've seen a family member or close friends up close, and you thought, boy, they had a great marriage. Would you share some of that with each other? For me, it was really Jim and Pam King, who we've had to the church to share on several occasions. And as a young man in my 20s, watching their honor and respect be worked out together, and the great affection and love they had for the Lord, the ministry, and their children, always uplifting and encouraging, and also providing some good discipline, sound discipline to their children. It just made a dramatic impact, and I'm so grateful they provided an example for me to follow. So take a moment, share that also one with another. And then secondly, I'd submit that we can also understand that being an imitator of another person in their example of marriage really works best, and maybe truly only works to glorify Christ, when that person we're imitating is imitating Christ. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 11:1 says this to the Corinthian church: "Be imitators of me as I am of Christ." So he gives us the sequence here, is that we can follow people, but make sure they're following Christ. There was a joke I had prepared. I didn't share it in the sermon. It just didn't fit in that moment, but it has to do with imitation, and how if we're just imitating someone blindly, perhaps without the full knowledge of what the circumstances and context, we could fall astray. Here's a quick joke. A missionary recruit went to Venezuela for the first time. He was struggling with the language and didn't understand a whole lot of what was going on. He actually arrived to church late, and it was already packed full. The only seat left was on the front pew. So as to not make a fool of himself, he decided to pick someone out of the crowd to imitate. He chose a man seated close to him in the front pew. So as they sang and clapped hands, the missionary recruit did the same. When the man stood up to pray, the missionary recruit also stood up. When he sat down, he sat down. During the preaching, the recruit didn't understand a thing. He just sat there and tried to look just like the man on the front pew. Then he perceived that the preacher was giving announcements. People clapped. He looked to see if the man was clapping, and he was, so he clapped too. Then the preacher said some words he didn't understand, and he saw that same man stand up. So he stood up too. But then suddenly a hush fell over the whole congregation. A few people gasped out loud. He looked around and saw no one else was standing, so he sat down. After service, the preacher stood at the door shaking hands as people left. As the missionary recruit stretched out his hand to shake the preacher's hand, the preacher said in English, "I take it you don't speak Spanish." The missionary recruit replied, "No, I don't. Isn't that obvious?" "Well, yes, it is," said the preacher. "I announced that the Acosta family had a newborn baby boy, and would the proud father please stand up?" So a lot of fun, and certainly we've probably been in those situations where we found ourselves imitating someone and only to find out we're doing the wrong thing. So being an imitator of someone is great as long as they're also imitating or following Jesus Christ. Secondly, would you take some time and talk about attributes that you see in Jesus that apply to healthy marriage? So you can utilize the text of 1 Peter, but certainly think even beyond that. What do we see in Jesus that we can imitate and thereby have a healthier marriage? Then lastly, looking specifically at the text, verses 1 through 6, focusing on the wife's relationship to her own husband and her understanding of herself, using Sarah as an example, someone worthy of following. Closes in verse 6, and I like the NIV translation a little bit better than the ESV, where it simply says, "And do not give way to fear." On the male side, we see verse 7, a call to honor a wife even though she's weaker. And in this way, I would submit to you that there's a sense of power that men are being challenged to resist. So that on the female side, or the wife's side, there's a sense of recognizing fear as standing in opposition to living with respect and submission to a husband. To wives there and to women, I would ask us to consider, what areas are we afraid of? What aspects of fear creep in and dictate our behavior and maybe even shape it in a negative way? And to the men and the husbands, I would ask, what aspects of power, that temptation we have to override someone, to overrule someone, when instead we're called to honor our wife, what aspects of power come to us? What's the temptation of power we face? What's the temptation to rule and dominate? And so as we share one with another, and it's a bit more personal and introspective, I want to ask us, as always, to pray one for another. Would you pray specifically for things that come up in that group conversation, and pray widely for marriage? Marriages in our church and our community, that marriage would be brought back to a sacred status in the United States of America. So would you join and pray in a consecrated and faith-filled way that God will bless marriage and will bless our marriages in health according to His Word. God bless you as you do it. I'm so glad you were able to hang out, and thanks for being a part of a Connect group.